This is a Fox News alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. We'll have all the latest news on the Trump transition process for President-elect Trump in just a moment. But first, there's some news on the Democratic side of the House. There might be some changes, some signals for House Democrats. A change perhaps coming. The headline here, Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is being challenged by a relatively little-known Ohio congressman. So what does that mean? Let's get the latest from Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill. Hi, Mike.
Brett, good evening. Ohio Democrat Congressman Tim Ryan is challenging Nancy Pelosi, saying Democrats will never be the majority party if they only win New York and California. Ryan's letter to colleagues saying, quote, under our current leadership, Democrats have been reduced to our smallest congressional minority since 1929. This should indicate to all of us that keeping our leadership team completely unchanged will simply lead to more disappointment in future elections. Ryan sounded like he was ready to challenge Pelosi in an interview with Fox yesterday.
Well, I don't know if I'm the solution, but I think we need to have the conversation about who may be the solution, and maybe it's Nancy Pelosi, maybe it's not.
Since returning to Capitol Hill, Pelosi has been chased by reporters asking her about her future. She said the problem in this election was at the presidential level and not with her. Pelosi has been a Democratic Party leader for more than a dozen years, and yesterday fired a warning shot saying to colleagues she has the support of 2/3 of the Democratic caucus. Today, Pelosi acknowledged the tension with her members.
There's a lot of unease. I don't see anything about what is being suggested now as anything but the friendship of all of us. We are family. I never said unanimity. I did say unified, and I know we will be unified.
Leadership elections were supposed to be held today. They were bumped back. Now Congressman Ryan has about 2 weeks to make his case to be the next Democratic leader. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. Now to the transition. The Trump Tower looks a lot like the scene of a job fair tonight. Prospective candidates for major positions in the Donald Trump administration are coming and going at a rapid pace there as the president-elect seeks to put together his first cabinet. And a very familiar name is being discussed, at least, for a very big position. Correspondent Doug McElway is outside Trump Tower tonight. Good evening, Doug.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Brett. And the biggest sign yet that President-elect Donald Trump is trying to reach out to his former detractors. The transition team announced that Mitt Romney will be meeting with Donald Trump this weekend at the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey. Apparently, Romney is being considered for the Secretary of State job. Sometime after that, Trump will embark on a cross-country tour.
We're working on a victory tour now.
Is playing host to his first meeting with a foreign leader, Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe, one whose feathers candidate Trump often ruffled.
Here's the thing. With Japan, they have to pay us or we have to let them protect themselves.
While campaigning, Trump often threatened to yank U.S. military protection of Japan unless it contributed more to its own defense. He has accused Japan of manipulating its currency, and he opposes the TPP, which Japan supports. But Prime Minister Abe, one observer noted, knows how to approach, quote, strong men. He's on a charm offensive, writing of Trump's, quote, extraordinary talents in a congratulatory message.
President-elect has met now or spoken with 32 world leaders, continues to make sure that he listens to them, hears their concerns.
And while it seems Mr. Trump is moderating his often aggressive tone, his predecessor during his joint press conference in Germany suggested why.
I think President-elect is going to see fairly quickly the demands and responsibilities of a U.S. president are not ones that you can treat casually. And that in a big, complex, diverse country, the only way that you can be successful is by listening and reaching out and working with a wide variety of people.
It's a great transition.
There was another cattle call at Trump Tower today.
Sir, would you like to serve in the Trump administration? Well, I'd be honored to be considered.
Are you moving to Washington?
With a who's who of movers and shakers making their way in to see the president-elect.
World leaders, people who are visionary, people who have gotten things done. Fred Smith, Nikki Haley, Secretary Kissinger, Senator Jeff Sessions, Admiral Mike Rogers. These are people at the top of their game.
And the transition team continues to push back hard against those reports of disorganization.
I've been in on these meetings. I'm on the executive committee, and what we're seeing is a very orderly group of people working on behalf of the American people.
Aides announced another step forward today with the formation of landing teams. These are people with special expertise in government agencies who will be popping into Washington to build a Trump framework there. The first to descend on Washington will be the National Security team. They'll be making visits to the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the State Department, as well as the National Security Agency. Right back to you.
Doug McKelway outside Trump Tower. Doug, thank you. Vice President-elect Mike Pence says the Trump administration wants to work in concert with Congress. How that works in reality will, of course, be revealed after the inauguration. Tonight, Chief Legal Correspondent Shannon Bream looks at how the Vice President-elect is handling his new duties and what we can expect when he takes office.
We're excited about moving the Trump agenda forward in the coming Congress, and I'm just so grateful.
Vice President-elect Mike Pence will play a critical role in building a bridge between the politically inexperienced president-elect and the Capitol Hill lawmakers he'll have to work with in order to get his ambitious legislative agenda moving. Today, Pence dropped in on Hill power players from both sides of the aisle. Republicans Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Democrats incoming Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi.
We're beginning to discuss areas that we might move forward on together, and that's what the American people want us to do, is find ways to revive our economy, improve American lives, enhance the security of this nation.
Trump insiders say he trusts Pence, as evidenced by his lead role in the transition.
I think he's been given a very substantial grant of authority to help make things work.
Pence is expected to be less of a Vice President LBJ to President JFK, relegated to funerals and diplomatic events, and much more of a Vice President Cheney to President George W. Bush, highly involved and independent.
He may be one of the best prepared vice presidents that we've had in modern time.
Not only is Pence currently the governor of Indiana, he also spent 12 years in the House, eventually becoming chairman of the House Republican Conference. He's also got a law degree and once worked as a radio show host.
And then when you add to that his personality, Mike Pence is from the Midwest. He's low-key, he's intelligent, he's unflappable.
Today, Pence talked about how humbled he was to return to the Hill. His visit sparking Twitter selfies like this one from House Republican Conference Chair, Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers. Great having Mike Pence visit today. I'm excited to work with him and real Donald Trump to shake up the status quo in Washington, D.C. Hashtag Make America Great Again.
Mr. Pence has officially signed the Memorandum of Understanding that will now allow him to receive additional briefings. It was a document that was necessary to move forward with the legal transition process. Brett.
Shannon, thank you. Donald Trump's election has elicited displays, as we've seen, of hatred rarely seen in many areas of society, not normally associated with politics. Case in point tonight, a California school district that is portraying the president-elect in most unflattering terms. National correspondent William LaJeunesse has the story from Los Angeles tonight.
I just don't think that Donald Trump is fit to run our country.
Ella Gibson attends a San Francisco public school where teachers have a new lesson plan written by instructor Fakra Shah, who says her goal is for students to gain a working knowledge of American racial violence and its anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-Islamophobic, anti-homophobic history.
We should all take this stance. And we should create spaces in our schools and in our communities where students can have their voices heard.
And she says don't sidestep the fact that a racist and sexist man has become the president by pandering to a huge racist and sexist base.
I don't think he respects anybody of color.
There are a lot of things I would like to say about Donald Trump, but I just want to say that I'm not scared of him.
Trump has had his fair share of controversial statements, but critics say there's a fine line between education and indoctrination.
And this type of fear-mongering and demagoguery should not be conducted with public funds.
The course is not required, but was endorsed and distributed to the district's 6,000 instructors by the teachers union.
As educators, our first impulse is to provide the children with a safe space in which to deal with their feelings and make sense out of the world.
The plan says students might curse and swear, but you would too if you have suffered under the constructs of a white supremacy or experienced sexism. So make sure to validate students' feelings by saying, I hear you, and you are right, and this is unjust. As for students with a different point of view,
that child is going to get teased and taunted by his classmates or even his teacher if this is the message coming from the teacher's podium.
Shah disagrees.
If they're for Trump, they're welcome in my class to say why they're for Trump.
District officials could not say how many teachers are using the lesson, but have no plan to remove it. As for additional teaching materials, Shah recommends Michael Moore's movie, Trumpland. Brett?
William, thank you. The Secret Service says it has seized $30 million in counterfeit money in Peru. U.S. dollars. Operation Sunset is said to be the largest such seizure in agency history. More than 1,500 Peruvian National Police officers were involved. 48 arrests were made. The service says 6 counterfeit plants were suppressed, 8 manufacturing presses taken, and more than 1,600 printing plates and negatives found. President Obama's top intelligence official will not be staying on in the new administration. The Director of National Intelligence made what is apparently his final appearance in front of one key committee today, just hours after turning in his resignation. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has the story.
The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, has openly discussed his plan to leave government at the end of this administration, and today he made it official.
I submitted my letter of resignation last night, which felt pretty good.
Clapper's exit comes as the threat from lone wolf attacks like the recent plot in New York City and New Jersey has never been greater.
That is a very complex problem and requires, I think, first and foremost, community involvement.
Clapper was also pressed on some of the Obama administration's signature foreign policy initiatives. Despite the agreement brokered by Secretary Kerry, Clapper said Iran's nuclear and missile development programs are still moving forward.
I can't say that Iran's behavior has changed.
On the election-related hacks designed to influence voters, Clapper said the decision to publicly blame Vladimir Putin's government was not taken lightly.
We gave considerable thought to diming out Russia with that statement.
And Clapper said the FBI director's decision to reopen and then close the Clinton email investigation days before the election was justified.
Whatever actions he took, he did so in what he felt was best, and I have no basis for questioning that.
As for the flawed 2014 ISIS intelligence that painted a rosy picture of administration progress, one lawmaker emphasized no one has been disciplined.
We are not able to take authoritative personnel-related actions on these instances and allegations until the IG investigation is done.
I have to tell you that the American people and our soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines deserve not to wait 2 years to hold accountable folks who put bad information in the field.
And in a pointed line of questioning, the committee chairman pressed witnesses on why the Defense Department cribbed Wikipedia to justify the location of a controversial intelligence base.
Well, I'm just alarmed, Secretary Work, that we would rely on Wikipedia, free online encyclopedia that's famously known for most high school students plagiarizing their homework.
I would say that I'm surprised that this comes directly from a Wikipedia page.
As the president's principal intelligence advisor, DNI Clapper oversees the 17 intelligence agencies. With more than 50 years of military experience, Clapper's exit leaves a void, underscoring the importance of a smooth transition and timely appointments by the president-elect. Brett?
Catherine, thank you. Let's talk more about who might replace Clapper or other top intelligence spots in the Trump administration with the chairman of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, Devin Nunes. He's also a member of Donald Trump's transition team. Thanks for being here, Mr. Chairman.
It's good to be with you, Brett.
That was quite something, that Wikipedia mention at the end of Catherine's
Yeah, it's embarrassing. I mean, this is part of the problem, I think, that why Donald Trump won, because there's incompetency at every level. I mean, even at the Department of Defense, which, I think the American people trust the Department of Defense. But if they're using Wikipedia to justify billion-dollar decisions, there's a big problem.
You think Clapper did a good job?
Look, the thing about Clapper is he served for 40 years, a lot of that time in uniform. I think his problem has been the last few years because the administration, it's really who he serves, I think, which caused him the most problems because they put him in almost impossible positions trying to defend an administration that had a policy that was lead from behind. And so he consistently would try to, I think, I don't want to say not answer questions, but find ways to not answer questions, and I think he got himself into trouble. But with that said, I mean, look, the guy had a long, good career. He did a great job in many cases. I think just the last few years have been tough.
You're on the Trump transition team. You've been publicly talked about as a possible director of CIA, director of national intelligence. Would you do that?
Yeah, well, I've told them that, well, first of all, I have not been asked, but I agreed to serve on the executive committee, and you know, with the understanding that I was not going to be asked for any other position. I'm happy where I'm at. My family lives in California, and I just think it would be a really tough sell for that.
Those are important positions. You have some names of people who might be considered?
I do. I think you've seen a lot of them that have been going into Trump Tower over the last few days. It's quite an organized process. It's been interesting to be involved in this, to see somebody from outside of government come in and kind of bring a business mind to this. So what Donald Trump did right away was put together an executive committee. He's working out of New York now. I think they'll gradually start to transition down to Washington here. But what they're using me for, which I've been very impressed with, is they ask me if I know someone and would I go out, would I call that person, would I recruit that person, and I've done a lot of that, and I've really enjoyed it. And so it just would be totally inappropriate for me to give you names.
How about I'll give you names? Representative Pompeo?
Pompeo would be a great choice for a number of positions. He serves on the Intelligence Committee with me. He's a West Point graduate, and I think he would do a fine job for this nation.
Pete Hoekstra?
Pete Hoekstra was chairman of the Intelligence Committee for a long time. Also, I think he's been with Donald Trump, spent a lot of time with Donald Trump. I'm not sure if he's interested or not, but I know that he's a quality guy.
Is he going to have problems filling some of these top spots?
No, this is what the press keeps reporting this. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, my phone is ringing off the hook with people who are volunteering. I think the folks that are going to have trouble with this are the people who, for the most part, were trashing Donald Trump and never tried to help Donald Trump. And you know, there's some good quality people that probably won't be in this administration, but it's going to give opportunities to younger people and people who have been waiting in the wings, kind of below this kind of Acela corridor beltway problem that we have around here.
What are three biggest threats that President Trump will face?
Well, I actually always say there's five, and I'll do it real quickly. But you've got the jihad problem, which is ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc. But the growing power of China, their expansion all over the globe. The Russia problems. Then you have the counterproliferation problems, which are kind of the crazy cats, which are Iran, North Korea, and others. And then surrounding all of that are the cyber problems, which at any given time, cyber can blow up in our face for all of those issues. So those are kind of the top five to me.
And of those, is there one that
I don't think you can say one's more important than the other, because I think all five on any given day can all be a big problem.
Lieutenant General Mike Flynn is reported to be considered for National Security Advisor. I know you worked with him as he was the head of DIA. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts about that possible appointment? It hasn't happened yet, but we're getting indications that it may.
He's one of the best leaders in the military and military intelligence that I've ever worked with. I first met him when he was in Iraq, head of intelligence for JSOC there, which was one of the, probably in our history of military and warfare, was the largest killing machine ever assembled, that helped us to win the war in Iraq, to bring Al-Qaeda to its knees. If you look at the teams that he's been able to assemble over the years, he's been one of our most successful military intelligence officers in modern history.
There's some controversy that he signed up Turkey as a client for his consulting firm. This is the Daily Caller, an intelligence consulting firm founded by retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Donald Trump's top military advisor was recently hired as a lobbyist by an obscure Dutch company with ties to Turkey's government and its president, Erdogan. He didn't reveal this when he wrote this op-ed about Turkey, that they need the U.S. support, and that Washington is essentially harboring Turkey's Osama bin Laden, in his words, this cleric that Turkey blames for possibly leading that coup. Concerns about that? Obviously, his appointment as NSA wouldn't be Senate need to be Senate confirmed. But your thoughts on this and the criticism that he's taking?
Well, Turkey, well, first off, when people are out of not in government, they represent foreign governments. That's how it works here. And he's a quality guy. He's a quality guy, and people would want to hire him. As it relates to Turkey, you have to remember Turkey is a NATO ally, and they are a problem child. Erdogan's caused a lot of problems. There was a coup there. We don't know exactly who was behind the coup, but what I would do if General Flynn gets into one of these positions, he would need to look closely at the intelligence, and then once he has all of that intelligence, kind of determine whether or not that would be the right decision. And he can always, with more intelligence, he could change his position, or he may be right, and we just don't know that.
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your time. Come back when you can tell us about some more people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, President Obama making a habit out of talking to the media about the president-elect. President Obama continues to pile up some serious FaceTime with the media during his farewell international tour. The president teamed up with Germany's chancellor today for his third news conference of the week. And once again, the main topic of conversation was his soon-to-be successor. Correspondent Kevin Cork shows us what happened from Berlin.
It was both a reminder and a warning.
Democracy is hard work.
Standing alongside German Chancellor Angela Merkel, President Obama today said the recent political shockwaves to hit the U.S. and Europe should serve as a cautionary tale to never take democracy for granted.
Because we have lived in an era that has been largely stable and peaceful, there is a tendency, I think, to assume that that's always the case. And it's not.
On what's expected to be his final overseas trip as president, Mr. Obama and Ms. Merkel spent much of their joint news conference fielding questions about President-elect Donald Trump. Earlier in the day, in an apparent nod to fears here of increasing U.S. isolationism in a Trump administration.
Germany is a disaster now.
During the presidential campaign, Trump was a frequent critic of Merkel's policy on Syrian refugees. He even took to Twitter to take a shot at Time magazine for naming Merkel 2015 Person of the Year, tweeting, "I told you Time magazine would never pick me as Person of the Year despite being the big favorite. They picked person who is ruining Germany." But today, Merkel shook off the criticism, noting that the deep ties between the two countries would endure.
That is in our mutual interest, so we will continue this. We'll approach this with an open mind, and we'll do this on the basis of deep conviction with President-elect Donald Trump.
And while the president said he remained cautiously optimistic about his successor, he challenged Mr. Trump to stand up to Russia when they deviate from universal values and international norms.
My hope is that he does not simply take a realpolitik approach and suggest that, if we just cut some deals with Russia, that we just do whatever is convenient at the time.
Brett, Friday, the president's schedule will expand just a bit to include meetings with Eurozone leaders from France, the UK, Spain, and Italy. Of course, that's all just ahead of his trip to South America for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Peru, and no doubt trade will top the agenda there. Brett?
Kevin Cork traveling with the president in Berlin. Kevin, thank you. U.S. officials tell Fox News Russia has launched long-range bombers from a base in southern Russia for the first time in a year. We're told the planes fired cruise missiles into Syria. Meanwhile, the Russian military says it killed at least 30 members of an al-Qaeda-linked group during an airstrike in northern Syria this week. The statement claims some of the organization's leaders are among the dead. Poor weather and cloudy skies are hampering the advance of Iraqi special forces into ISIS-held parts of Mosul. But there is progress being made, and some of the people who were terrorized under ISIS rule are now doing better. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott was on the ground today in Iraq.
Iraqi forces regrouping in their offensive against ISIS in Mosul as cloud cover limited crucial U.S. airstrikes and surveillance. No pause on the ISIS side, though. A car bomber and a sniper leaving Iraqi soldier and civilian casualties, amid new reports of anti-ISIS coalition gains to the west and the south of the city. On the eastern side of Mosul, Fox News witnessed another anti-ISIS tactic: Males, especially fighting age, being separated from women and children fleeing the fighting. Their identities checked out against a militant database and weeded out if they turn up as ISIS.
About 3 days ago, we caught some of them trying to infiltrate with the civilians.
Most do continue on to refugee camps where there is shelter and food.
Each of these stacks represents 30 days worth of rations for a family of 5. The folks here show their identification, come over here, pick up the sacks of wheat and flour, and then take them back to their tents at this sprawling refugee camp.
The distribution of the aid packages is being handled by the North Carolina-based Samaritan's Purse charity, long active in the region.
These are extremely important. A lot of them haven't had food, and this is the first food that they've received.
Most refugees are also reeling from harrowing escapes from clashes, and before that, terror rule. 42-year-old father of 5, Ali Mohammed, says he was arrested and whipped twice by ISIS for the crime of smoking cigarettes, forbidden by the militants.
We were like prisoners. All we could do was be inside our homes. There was no work and nothing to do.
There might be light at the end of the dark tunnel for refugee Ali Mohammed. He has hope that ISIS will soon be driven out of Mosul and he and his family can return to their home. It might be a while yet. Brett.
Greg Palcott in Erbil. Greg, thank you. The suspect in September's bombings in New Jersey and New York is pleading not guilty. Ahmad Khan Rahimi entered his plea today. Rahimi is accused of 2 bombings that injured 30 people. He could get life in prison if convicted. More than 30 fires in the southeast remain uncontrolled tonight. About 5,000 firefighters and support personnel are battling the blazes that have charred 128,000 acres. The smoke has people coughing and wheezing, even in places like Atlanta that are far from the flames. The chair of the Federal Reserve says the case has strengthened for an increase in interest rates. Janet Yellen cites what she considers reports of an improving economy. The Fed is expected to raise rates next month.
The evidence we've seen since we met in November is consistent with our expectation of strengthening growth and improving labor market, inflation moving up.
Yellen also says she plans to serve out her term at the Fed, which runs through January of 2018. Stocks were up today. The Dow gained 36. The S&P 500 finished ahead 10. The Nasdaq jumped 39. Speaking of the economy, there could be some major effects from any changes in immigration policy brought about by the next president. Tonight, correspondent Dan Springer looks at how some farmers in the Northwest are already going legal in their efforts to find workers.
26-year-old Diego Ramirez is a cattle rancher in Mexico, but he left home in the spring to pick apples in Washington state. In 6 months in the orchard, he makes double what he earns in a full year on his ranch. Ramirez is among a growing group of guest farm workers brought into the U.S. on H-2A visas.
There's not enough local workforce. You know, there's a sign that says need workers everywhere.
Nate Rubio, son of an illegal immigrant, says tighter border enforcement and migrants taking jobs in cities has forced growers to go legal when it comes to hiring workers.
When we closed the border, the people who were doing those seasonal jobs, they either left or they settled here undocumented and took full-time jobs.
Since 2011, the U.S. State Department doubled the number of H-2A visas issued to over 108,000. It's a reversal for many growers. There is a downside to the H-2A program for growers. It is expensive. One farmer tells me it costs him on average $6 more an hour for the guest workers when you factor in all the extra expenses. And those costs have to be passed along to consumers, making him a little less competitive. Among the pricey extras, growers pay for background checks, transportation, and housing during their 6-month stay. They're required to pay above minimum wage, at least $12.69 an hour. Immigration officials can't say how many guest workers go AWOL, but a Department of Homeland Security report estimates less than 2% of all those on visas end up overstaying.
People understand that you can come in, disappear, and nothing is going to happen. What we need is a system that holds both the government and the employers accountable.
Under a new president, many expect the system to change, but farmers here hope Donald Trump's wall has a door to let in as many guest workers as they need. In Othello, Washington, Dan Springer, Fox News.
Some interesting names popping up as potential cabinet members in the Trump administration. We'll go over some of them and talk about the transition with the panel after a quick break.
I wouldn't advise them to be silent. What I would advise, elections matter, voting matters, organizing matters.
If Republicans go to Washington and we don't deliver on what we promised, I think we'll be looking at pitchforks and torches in the street, and quite rightly. And that can't happen.
I think it's good that the president-elect is meeting with people like Mr. Romney. He's meeting with a lot of talented people that are going to be he needs good relationships with. I think Mr. Romney will be quite capable of doing a number of things, but he'll be one of those, I'm sure, that's reviewed. And Mr. Trump will make that decision.
Well, that was really the big news out of today's transition as we watched the elevators at Trump Tower back and forth, that Governor Mitt Romney is going to meet with Donald Trump this Saturday. And some are reporting that he's up for possibly Secretary of State. We don't know that. There are names floating all over the place. Just moments ago, Donald Trump finished up a meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe. That is his first meeting face-to-face with a world leader. And as I mentioned, with the people coming in and out today, it was quite interesting watching Trump Tower. Henry Kissinger, the Japanese Prime Minister we just mentioned, South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, Representative Jeb Hensarling of Texas, Governor Rick Scott of Florida, Safra Katz, the co-chief executive of Oracle, General Jack Keane, who we know very well here, Admiral Mike Rogers of the NSA, Ken Blackwell. A lot of folks. Let's bring in our panel, talk about this transition. Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano, Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Judge, I guess that's the thing that people looked at and said, wow, Mitt Romney, after all that back and forth in the campaign.
You know, I thought of you and Charles as soon as Mitt Romney's name was mentioned. It's almost like Nixon going to China. I mean, Mitt Romney's blistering attacks, repeated and persistent, on Donald Trump during the campaign were personal, both, well, not in the general election, but certainly in the primary election. I'm of the view that taking a snapshot picture of the transition at any given time is really just going to have us pulling our collective hair out, because it doesn't matter to the country who the president-elect interviews. It just matters who he chooses. I get some of my guidance from our colleague Anthony Scaramucci, who's a member of the executive committee. You ran a nice clip from him the other day. This is very orderly, very businesslike. We don't know if this is the way other administrations did it, because none of us was involved then. But if some of the names that are being touted end up on the cabinet, we might not be getting, for example, at state, the foreign policy changes that Donald Trump promised and on which he was elected. John Bolton, for example, a friend of ours, a person whose intellect I respect, is hardly the let's pull back from our involvement in Europe, let's soften our relationship with Russia that Donald Trump said he was going to give us. In fact, John would be the opposite of that.
Sure, but obviously the foreign policy and the directives come from the president, and the person follows that. But you're right on the individual feelings of these various issues. I want to put up David Axelrod's tweet, and this is about our point yesterday about the timing. David Axelrod, obviously former advisor to President Obama and his campaign before that. We hadn't made any major appointments at this point in 2008. Lots of reasons to be concerned about real Donald Trump's transition, but the pace of the announcements is not one of them. We hadn't made any major appointments. I don't remember being criticized for it. Caitlin.
Well, one thing to consider with this Trump transition is that, first of all, the Trump campaign didn't necessarily expect to win. And so this provides more of a pressure point in choosing these next folks. The other point is that he ran as an outsider. He ran as a businessman. He ran as someone who will clean up kind of the traditional ways of doing things. So that requires a different kind of vetting process, I think, for some of these folks. To the judge's point, he made lots of promises on foreign policy, on tax policy, and those sorts of things. So using that framework to vet some of these folks is important. The big question I have is whether he is wanting to bring people in who opposed him. Mitt Romney,
team of rivals.
Exactly, a team of rivals, or whether we know Trump is very loyal to that group that's surrounding him right now. Whether he maintains loyalty over rivals remains to be seen exactly.
Yeah, and you know, the definite facts on this are tough to pin down because you have people on the inside throwing names all over the place, and you say they're being considered, but you don't know where the president-elect's head really is. I want to put up this statement about Jeff Sessions from the Trump team. While nothing has been finalized and he is still talking with others as he forms his cabinet, the president-elect has been unbelievably impressed with Senator Sessions and his phenomenal record as Alabama's Attorney General and U.S. Attorney. It is no wonder the people of Alabama re-elected him without opposition. Now, I read into that a couple of things. One, he could be Attorney General. Two, he might stay in the Senate. And he's just saying, hey, he's a great guy, he's amazing, but we're probably not going to give him a spot.
Which is why I think the judge is right, that trying to read the tea leaves here is really quite fruitless. And I think the criticism that the incoming administration has gotten is, as David Axelrod says, slightly unbalanced. That at the same point they had not made appointments, and he said, I don't remember being criticized. It's as if parts of the press who got used to attacking Donald Trump in the campaign and are just itching to start those attacks when he takes office, and I'm sure there will be reason to criticize him. Can't take an interregnum of a month or two off. They're such in the mode, they just have to do it. It's almost reflexive. The guy's putting together a team. Let's see who he ends up with. I think bringing in Romney, whether he gives him a job or not, is quite a signal. That was one of the bitterest attacks on a candidate of one's own party ever, delivered by Romney. And for Trump to bring him in, I think, helps to blunt the sort of the prejudice that people have that he will only stick with loyalists, a small group, outsiders, and the country will be adrift at the beginning because they're going to have to learn everything from the beginning when they come into office. So I thought that was the most important signal of the day. And of course, bringing in Henry Kissinger, he's Mr. Foreign Policy. You really can't be sworn into office unless you've met Henry Kissinger. I think it's in the Constitution.
He's a true brain on foreign policy. I'm not going to go through the litany, Judge, of the Mitt Romney tweets or the sound bites through the campaign.
Well, Charles is right. It was about as harsh as you can imagine.
But for Donald Trump to get to the point where he's meeting with Mitt Romney and possibly even considering a position, Donald Trump, who does not forget, I'm not sure if he forgives, but he usually remembers somebody who didn't stand with him. That seemed like the news of the day.
And for Mitt Romney to agree to come to Donald Trump, whatever is in Governor Romney's mind, I think it's extraordinary. And perhaps it will show what Donald Trump promised us, and not everyone believed, that once he is elected, you will see a more presidential Donald Trump, a person who can wrap his arms around those who never would have thought they'd want to be in the same room with him.
One person who was running the transition was Governor Chris Christie. Take a listen to this.
I have every intention of serving out my full term as governor. I've said that from the beginning. And I have no reason to believe, as we stand here today, that I will do anything other than serve out my full term as governor.
Boy, it started, he was running the transition. Then Mike Pence, the vice president-elect, was put in charge. Now it doesn't seem like Chris Christie is getting perhaps anything.
Right, and it's especially remarkable because Christie was one of the earlier former rivals to come out and endorse Donald Trump and took a lot of his own political capital, sacrificed a lot of his own political capital to do so. Of course, we've seen the reports of the Kushner tension with Governor Christie. We also know that Christie
Well, just rewind. Jared Kushner is the son-in-law married to Ivanka, and his father was put in jail by then U.S. Attorney Chris Christie.
Very questionable prosecution. Very questionable.
In addition, of course, Christie is facing his own controversies over Bridgegate. And the other thing, though, to remember about Donald Trump is he's someone, as if we take his businesses, he's someone that knows and wants to delegate. So I think that puts extra pressure on some of these picks because these are people who are going to be perhaps more involved than before. Vice President to be Mike Pence is a good example of that. He was on Capitol Hill today meeting with lawmakers. He's going to play a really key role, not only as the traditional liaison to the Capitol, but also in terms of really guiding and governing. He's one of the few people on this team that has that real experience.
Now, maybe Cheney-esque, Charles. It looks like Chris Christie, though, has his own interregnum.
Yes, and look, I mean, his...
It's like, I just wanted to use the word again. I just really wanted to use it.
Yeah, I know. In him, I think it's all the more poignant. Because remember, it's not just that he was head of the transition team. He was quite obviously running for the number 2 spot on the ticket. So it isn't as if his ambitions began. It wasn't as if he was going to remain the governor of New Jersey through the selection process for number 2. So he got disappointed from the beginning. And this is a man whose political career looks to be at its low ebb. Now, we said that a lot about Trump himself and about many of his associates, so you can't really predict. But if you had to pick somebody you didn't want to be on the transition team right now, it would be Chris Christie.
Next up, upheaval for House Democrats.
I don't know if I'm the solution, but I think we need to have the conversation about who may be the solution, and maybe it's Nancy Pelosi, maybe it's not. But the question is, if we're going to win the House of Representatives back, then we need to go into red congressional districts, red states, and connect with working class voters.
I'm respectful of what people are saying. There's a lot of unease. I've regularly had some opponents. And as members in there said, we cannot be taking the full responsibility for what happened in the election.
Well, Nancy Pelosi has a challenger now. Representative Tim Ryan from Ohio putting out an announcement. I have spent countless hours meeting and talking to members of our caucus, and the consensus is clear. What we are doing right now is not working. Under our current leadership, Democrats have been reduced to our smallest congressional minority since 1929. This should indicate to all of us that keeping our leadership team completely unchanged will simply lead to more disappointment in future elections. Back with the panel, Caitlin, they're kind of laughing this off in the minority leader's office, it seems like, but it also seems like this could be the beginning of a real fight for the heart of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely, and I think we're going to see this play out over the next several weeks, if not months, if not years. I've been talking to Democrats on Capitol Hill all week, and there are a couple different concerns. One, they haven't been in the minority in Washington in a long time, so they're operating against that. Also, they've continued to lose the House. They've lost 60 seats over the course of the past few years, and there's a feeling, especially among the younger lawmakers on Capitol Hill, who don't think right now that Pelosi is the person to lead the caucus, especially after those losses. There's also a feeling among some that they have to go back to their constituents and say, we have absorbed and learned lessons from this, and if we just elect Pelosi unchallenged, we aren't sending the right message. If you think about it, their leadership in the Democratic Party is they're much older. They are from the coasts. There's not a lot of geographic diversity. And for many of these lawmakers, that's really critical in terms of rebuilding the party.
Pretty amazing, the turnaround on the story. Before this election, just days before, we were talking about how the Republican Party, there was a fight for the Republican Party and how they were going to recover all of that. And now it's completely turned on its head.
Well, there's nothing like winning to bring unity. There's nothing like being utterly shellacked. I think someone said after the 2010 midterm, that wasn't an election, that was a restraining order. There's nothing like that to make you think about who you are. Look, you look at the Democrats in the Senate, and it's the classic accusation. The Senate part is led by a New Yorker. Nancy Pelosi's from San Francisco. The average income in her constituency is twice what it is in Tim Ryan's. He represents industrial Ohio. She represents limousine liberalism. And it's beginning to dawn on them that if you keep saying that global warming is the biggest problem for our country, for our century, while people are losing their jobs and their dignity in the Midwest, you are not appealing to people. Now, I think it starts, and there's a large part of this that is to be laid at the feet of Barack Obama. I thought his kind of liberalism was a huge overreach with Obamacare and all the other regulations. But the House went along with it, and the Senate went along with it. Democrats, I'm talking about, protected him and made the same case. This is, I think, sort of a ricochet shot of getting at Obama without attacking him. But bringing down and changing the people who followed him over the cliff.
Judge.
I agree with both Charles and with Caitlin. I'm the last person in the world to be giving advice to the Democrats. But I think Tim Ryan is a fresh face as opposed to the tired old lefty that has led them. I also think it'd be better for Donald Trump to be dealing with someone who quintessentially represents the blue-collar voter that deserted Mrs. Clinton, that either typically voted Democrat or didn't vote at all and went in droves for Donald Trump. I am sure that Tim Ryan voted for Mrs. Clinton, but he represents that type of voter. He has his finger on that pulse. It will help Donald Trump as well as help the Democrats if Ryan is their leader in the House.
And look, I think, for one of the early moves is this infrastructure plan that incorporates a Democratic bill that's already out there,
right,
and working with them right off the bat. I got to run here. That's it for the panel, but we'll take a look at a friendship that will warm even the iciest of hearts when we return. Finally, tonight it appears that man's best friend has a few other pals in the animal kingdom. Check out this special moment between a dog and a polar bear caught on camera by a tour guide in Canada. I can hear it out there. Aww.
So
yeah, I mean,
aww.
But
he eats him at the end.
He eats him at the end. No, stop
Charles.
it, Charles. Thanks for inviting us to your home tonight. That's it for the special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Tucker Carlson tonight starts right now. No, he doesn't.